This is Adam Hamer. This is part 14 of my testimony about the 1990s GATE program, Deeper Layers. I previously told you about how I was subjected to specific esoteric protocols under laboratory settings, and neuro data was collected from me, as well as biotelemetrics. This was done to facilitate the laboratory study of alternative states of consciousness. The brain has a variety of different frequency states. You have alpha, you have theta, you have gamma, and it corresponds to the neural activity of the brain. Concept to understand here is entrainment. For example, when you listen to a song, your brain will match the frequency of the brain signals to correspond with the waves of the song, and this is how the basis of neural entrainment works. So a lot of what was being studied and exploited in the deeper layers of the USAPs connected to the Stargate program and the GATE program in the schools in the 90s, such that I was funneled into, involved the tracking of neural data using computers as intermediaries to attempt to study the unknown. And this is where the bridge occurs between the clinical study of the altered states of consciousness and non-human intelligences, military psyops such as Mind War, the Satanic Panic, and cover stories, and then actual esoteric practices and then the individuals who pioneered the studies of them, such as Michael Bertiaux, who was a pioneer of ideas such as the Meon, which is this cosmic void, and he developed frameworks and protocols that were integrated with the Temple of Set's protocols and instituted under military strict protocol testing samples at facilities where they were studied under laboratory settings, and I was part of this study. I was one of the non-consensual subjects. And so in the process to understand what I've already started to share with you about Tokoloshe and the Tokoloshe ritual that was weaponized by the US government incorrectly because it was stolen and it was combined with Haitian voodoo in a fusion, I was on a quest. I wanted to find out. I had that drawing. I knew that was the root anchor. I wanted to figure out how this tied into the laboratory memories and the fact that I knew that this memory of the Tokoloshe abuse involved horrific out-of-body near-death experience and laboratory monitoring as well. And a giant, this was like a cavitation. This room was like a giant, big, empty black room is how it felt. And then I was definitely drugged during it. Even though I was young, it still had a very hallucinatory quality to it that is not replicable or in a normal consciousness or even a dream. It was like, I could describe it to you like the people had exaggerated, almost wavy features as if they were drawn with colored chalk. It was likely, in my opinion, some sort of scopolamine or datura derivative, as that is what is in the traditional zombie powder. And it's my understanding that this program, which corresponds to the long time discussed in like survivor circles MONARCH Theta program, which is what this is. So that's what I was a part of. It's that program. And so how it works is it involves the use of telemetrics, which is the collection of biophysical data, the collection of data from my persons, data from my brain, data from my biosignals, and then using that data in conjunction with a laboratory setting and different configurations, such as the Temple of Set, which worked closely with military intelligence on these programs, was known for utilizing non-Euclidean shaped rooms, such as trapezoidal shaped chambers. And as I've told you, I did experience trapezoidal shaped chambers, and I've also experienced hexagonal and octagonal step down type rooms, which my understanding are likely related to the same overarching umbrella. Because what it is these rooms are designed to induce altered states of consciousness. So that brings me to the next topic, which is the Temple of Set. So the Temple of Set is, in my understanding, a military front, but also doubles as a mystery school. And what GATE really was is a mystery school operating out of the public school system. If you don't understand what a mystery school is essentially where esoteric practices from old societies such as Egypt or Babylon are carried on and perpetuated through history in secret through members-only groups, kind of like fraternity. So that stuff exists. It's existed since ancient times, and mystery schools persist to this day and permeate a lot of the upper layers of military intelligence, the elites, and the people who took part in planning and operating and running these programs. So that's where Temple of Set comes in. So on one hand, Temple of Set is entirely a psychological operation. So is the Church of Satan. It's designed to create the Satanic Panic. The Satanic Panic is the cover story for these deep layer laboratory programs that were studying voodoo and applied sciences of voodoo in conjunction with traditional esoteric rituals, high-tech science and psychoenergetics in the pursuit of attaining data that could not be attained any other way. And I'm going to get to how that data was collected, because that data involves the use of high-tech machinery, and I'm going to explain right now how the ritual use and the specific practices employed that were used on me in these programs and laboratory settings were not ritual in the sense of like the way that the PSYOP describes them. Like Satanic Panic, make no mistake, is a PSYOP. It was a cover story for the continuation of Mkoften and MK Ultra Successor programs under Black USAP, where they funneled children non-consensually to be experimented on in laboratory settings, especially from the school system such as myself. So I would be repeatedly, as I stated, bussed off campus from Kelland, Van Horn, and Corbett when I was a young child in the 1990s to these research facilities that ranged in location all around Tucson. Some of them were also located on military base, Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, as well as the University of Arizona. I would be taken on what I was told were field trips, or I would be drugged before and I would be completely delirious. And I remember being put on a bus, just like with sometimes one other kid, sometimes two other kids, sometimes more, and we would be driven. And I thought it was normal, as I've stated before, because two things, you're a child, number one, so if you're told it's normal and this is part of what you do as a child, you're going to accept it. And number two, as I've stated, I was drugged some of the times that I was transferred before I was transferred. So I would be given what would be like a little liquid, the pink drink, or a lollipop, and it would make me delirious or forgetful or dissociated. And then they would transport me off campus. I would find myself in a variety of other locations, sometimes not knowing how I got there or where I was, oftentimes sure that I was either underground or in some sort of a, like I said, like a large cavitation, like a picture of film studio almost. Like some of these, some of the things that weren't done in laboratory settings that were done strictly for programming were done in environments like that. Look, I think there was a script scenario that I recall, that, and I say I think because it was in a big room or it was in VR, that involves like enacting a full Alice in Wonderland scripted double scenario where essentially it's a false version of the story that uses to double as a programming script to reinforce programming into the brain. And how programming also factors into the deeper layers of these USAPs is compartmentalization. And think the movie Johnny Mnemonic. In Johnny Mnemonic, it's about like a remote courier who's not aware of the memories that he has. So the same idea here is that if you traumatize someone and fracture their mind, you can compartmentalize their identities, and then the people who know about the compartments can call them up and use them to both study that person's neurology and manipulate their brain waves on command, their subconscious on command, and then use that to elicit different brain states to study in a laboratory setting. So that's where you get to the Temple of Set and the occult practices, because really, if you want to understand demons, what you need to understand is at the very core, demons refer to, in the very oldest sense, unconscious processes of the human mind. And so the key of Solomon, the Goetia, that's about understanding the neural processes of your own mind, aka your own internal demons. And so the process of understanding demonology, especially in esoterica, is not about summoning magic monsters. It's about learning the corresponding neural functions to your own internal demons, and then learning how to master and control your demons. And this has a parallel in computing processing. If you look at the word daimon, it's used synonymous in a computer sense. That is how demons were employed in MK and successor programs in a laboratory setting. That is why the Satanic Panic is a PSYOP and a cover story, because the ritual abuse was done, yes, but it was done to facilitate technological study of altered states of consciousness, and the systems of occult were used themselves to map out the unconscious mind in a laboratory setting, utilizing pre-existing knowledge that individuals in these mystery societies had. Okay, so that brings us back to the Temple of Set. So the Temple of Set existed on one hand as a PSYOP to promote the idea that there were rampant cults across society and there was so much chaos. That was part of the successor program of MK Ultra's goal. It was to sow so much chaos in society that the ruling party could blind the public to just constant PSYOPs. That's mind war. That's what's going on in our news right now. That's why our news is just total fucking nonsense. It's supposed to be. It's not supposed to make sense. It's hyper-normalization. It's sort of like they want to make you feel like you're living in your own little Truman Show now, because they've tried to scale up these programs to mass scale. So think programming scripts, but on a mass scale algorithmically. And so Michael Aquino may or may not have really been into the deeper layers of the spirits in the occult, but one thing is certain: he had an understanding of psychological warfare and the corresponding relationship between that to demonology and how demons relate to understanding the unconscious processes of the mind. Because if you understand those, and you understand that the keys of Solomon were created wherein each sigil corresponds to the activation of different brain regions, you can understand how that would be of interest to neuroscientists, because they were curious if there were corresponding science that could be drawn from that. And the answer was yes. And it was Michael Aquino and his associates at the Temple of Set who brought the protocols into the lab that should be tested to see if data beyond the cursory or the surface level could be gleaned. And so Michael Aquino from the Temple of Set also had a person that is worth definitely mentioning again, named Stephen Flowers, who was one of the senior people in the Temple of Set, who was a part of a group called the Order of the Trapezoid, which was one of the higher level, like, practicing occultists in that group. And this gentleman, as well as another man in the group named Don Webb, who was the head of the group for a while after Aquino, up until I think 2002 or so, they were very interested in corresponding with another occultist that I mentioned earlier named Michael Bertiaux, who was specialized in Gnostic Haitian voodoo, and he pioneered a technique called VUDOTRONICS. And so I'll link in the bio a copy of his book. His book, in my research, is a key to understanding what was being studied in the laboratory settings in psychoenergetics, anomalous mental phenomena, and the Stargate USAPs. Because these, as I understand them, were the basis of the frameworks for some of the psychological tests that survivors, especially today, recount as ritual abuse. And then these tests were used both to study neurology and to program individuals for usage as assets. And essentially it was like a giant sleeper army that the government created to do all kinds of things, from courier jobs to sowing chaos to doing remote telepathic spy work and psychotronic warfare, etc. So that brings me to the merger point of Vudutronics and Michael Bertiaux's theories of the Meon. Meon is like the endless void, basically synonymous with a 0-point field or the Akashic field. But he had this idea, this guy, Michael Bertiaux, that you could access the Meon through specific ritual processes that he termed Radionics. And as I understand it, I'm not a fan of his, obviously, for obvious reasons. But Radionics is essentially, as I understand it, some sort of mathematical woo-woo where he felt like he had a little key to cracking through the Meon into real non-human intelligences. So this is where the non-human intelligences start entering the picture, and where skunkwork starts entering the discussion, because they do play a role in all of this as well. But I will get to that later in another video. But I will, again, like I said, initialize the topic now. So, as I've stated before, Radionics was part of Bertiaux's occult philosophy, and Radionics was about the idea that you could pierce through the Meon to contact real intelligences on the other side. And like I said, the Meon is the Akashic field. So it's essentially like, as I understand it, this idea that you're tapping into, you're using basically internal mental processes. These are the demons. You're projecting them outwards. Outwardly projected internal demons become egregores. That's a thought form manifest made outward. And the egregore, and as I understand it, in Bertiaux's framework, which was combined with the Temple of Set's trapezoid frameworks and some other processes they had developed, was designed to try to pierce through the Meon, to try to collect data from it and to contact entities that were in it. And this is what was being studied in the deeper layers of the AMP and psychoenergetics program and the Stargate USAPs. And I was a part of this. And this is where the Tokoloshe mask comes into play, because you see the Tokoloshe mask is an effigy. A Tokoloshe mask is essentially an externalized wooden analog form of an egregore. So it's an internal psychological process, externalized, and that's always the function that it's served. And even in like ritual practice, the idea behind it would be to function as a lure for real spiritual energies real spiritual essences that in the zombie ritual would then possess the individual. And so what was being recreated in Monarch Theta was through the use of telemetry and computer programs and psychotronics, was sort of acting as a computerized egregore, like an intermediary, that's why it's called in a lot of research about this topic, digital possession with biotelemetrics, because it is. What it is that's why the Persinger helmet was a part of this, because Persinger was studying spiritual and demonic experiences and if you could induce them electrically. That's where the basis of neural warfare meets the real story behind ritual abuse, and how Vudutronics, Radionics, and Temple of Set developed the lab protocol with the Order of the Trapezoid rituals that was exploited against non-consensual subjects against their will under deep cover black programs that led to a variety of weapons breakthroughs and consciousness breakthroughs, and the really unfortunate situation that we find our world in now, where people in power are wildly abusing the power that they have. A lot of that power comes from the breakthroughs that were acquired during these programs. So when the Temple of Set merged their practices on an experimental level, not like literally, they didn't merge divisions, but they had a shared agreement that they were both left-hand path practitioners, meaning they both did evil shit and they didn't have any qualms about it. So Temple of Set was like, yeah, we do fucked up shit. Bertiaux was like, yeah, we do fucked up shit. We both left-hand, okay? So they agreed they were both left-hand. They agreed that they could cross-facilitate knowledge. So what happened was they cross-facilitated the knowledge of Radionics and Vudutronics, which came from Bertiaux, and is outlined in the book that I'm going to link below. That book outlines the actual formulas, some of which were adapted for laboratory use by different military contractors, some of which who experimented with these exact ritual protocols modified by Temple of Set on me. And the Temple of Set, on the other hand, you had Mr. Flowers, who was the head of the Order of the Trapezoid, who specialized in, the trapezoid was used mainly to invoke dissociation. It was a way for, they could do the same ritual that they were trying to do once they added in the radionics, like the idea of contacting the Meon, but the initial version of it that had been developed, as I understand it, the trapezoid ritual involves traumatizing a subject or initializing a sort of subject into like a ritual state where they're contacting what they were viewing as demons, which would be, again, externalized, internal, subconscious, or unconscious processes, aka an egregore. So the Order of the Trapezoid and a lot of early base trauma mind control worked on the principle of using an egregore, which is a synthetic or unconscious construct, to act as a gatekeeper or guardian for a person's internal mental world. And this was replaced later on by computerized systems, and then later on those computerized systems were turned into algorithms, and algorithms are used on a mass scale to replicate some of these same things for population at large. And so when you get to how that factors into the laboratory setting, you can back up to the 1990s and 94 when I was being transported off campus and taken to laboratory settings, and I was subjected to exact modified Vudutronics and Radionics protocols mixed with ancestral props, essentially artifacts like the Tokoloche mask that was used. There was a Tokoloche mask, as I showed the picture of. Tokoloche, though it's not depicted in some cultures, is depicted in others for specific rituals. It's just considered taboo and it's very evil, so you don't mess with it. As you saw the other day, even just talking about it, a bird shit on my head. Good luck though, because the bird was just saying don't talk about it, but still. I got to share a little more about how it was a real studied framework that is what's beneath the ritual abuse psyop. Because the government wants people to think that there were a bunch of satanic cults going around doing crazy rituals on people and that there were all these child victims of ritual abuse. And yeah, I was a victim of ritual abuse, but it was ritual abuse done in a laboratory setting by professionals who were aiming to study the exploitation of consciousness to exploit my biology, physiology, and to develop neuroweapons. So it's not exactly the same thing as, oh yeah, these were a bunch of Satanists. Like, I would guess 90% of the people saying that are either on the government's payroll or one step removed and maybe not aware, but they're being steered around by someone who is. That said, brings me back to the fusion of the Temple of Set's trapezoid ritual and the Vudutronics and Radionics teachings of how to contact the Meon. So you have to understand that in the Temple of Set also had developed a bunch of frameworks for contacting with I refer to as like deep void entities. Both Bertiaux and Aquino viewed H.P. Lovecraft as a sort of prophet who was channeling unconsciously the actual extra-dimensional forces, the actual non-human intelligence. So both of them developed strange ritual protocols that were designed to channel these entities, and some of them were codified by like Michael Aquino's were codified into the Satanic Church's like initial ritual book, apparently back in the day. And again, as I've stated before, it's my understanding that was in PSYOP as well, to help further promote the idea that there's so much satanic chaos in society. It's an easy cover. Oh yeah, look, Church of Satan. Well, that's the intel agencies. I mean, the people in it were probably mystery school students, like really studying esoterica, but the actual cover story is literally like pomp and circumstance, I guess. I don't know if I use that correctly, but you know what I mean. It's kind of just like, it's like a movie. It's like a Disney movie. That's what it is. Like a Disney movie, you know, the bad guys. We did Church of Satan. We did Church of Temple of Set. Yeah, like, you know, I do believe that Michael Aquino really was affiliated with mystery schools that had preserved dark knowledge from Egypt, including from the Temple of Set. He claimed to be an actual priest of the original Egyptian line from Set. That would have been through a mystery school if that was true. It probably was true. But that aside, he was obviously using all of it for psychological warfare because he deeply understood how the unconscious mind could be exploited. One more note about him is that it's pretty odd that the Temple of Set is known for something called, it's like the order or something, the ritual or the rite of the 9 angles, some shit like that. And then somehow there's like some group I've heard of now, I've seen promoted online, like as a, you know, fear articles where like, oh, look at this scary group, and it's something like Order of 9 Angles, and I'm just like, yeah, dude, that was a fucking Michael Aquino ritual that was used in these government mandated, you know, USAPs where they pulled children out of schools and out of their homes, obviously, is my guess, because if they're willing to pull them out of school, what else were they willing to do? And they're subject to them to all kind of battery litany and tests in a lab setting to see what the hell happens. Because they ain't, like, the people running this didn't give a fuck about us, didn't give a fuck if we died. They didn't give a fuck if we died now. They were like literally trying to kill me. They fucking said it. And then the DOJ is just running cover for them. They're like, oh, out of jurisdiction. Like, yeah, dude, you try going through this shit when you're a fucking child. Like, the fuck is wrong with you people? Anyways, that aside, back to the Temple of Set and the merger of Vudutronics in the laboratory setting. So that's where you get the Togoloshe ritual. So the Togoloshe ritual was essentially like a continuation of psychological warfare, weaponized anthropology. And the idea was that would act like a lure. You do that ritual to someone, you abuse some kid, you both fracture their personality, use that as a base root anchor for the trauma. So that mask always brings back the trauma. And then the mask, because of the shape of it, and the ritual itself, because of the actual invocation, it, you know, has a certain energy to it. And this energy was designed to act as a sort of wave guide to invoke the egregore, the unconscious process. The wave guide is supposed to invoke an unconscious process externally. That's the egregore. And the egregore was, per these occultists, designed to contact actual non-human intelligences. So that was being studied in a laboratory setting, and that's how non-human intelligences factor in the initial phase. Because what you have here is, this also harkens back to Alex Jones's famous, they're stopping their hearts to talk to aliens. Yeah, they really were doing that. They did that to me. They induced cardiac arrest to do so. And how that factors in is that relates to these occult esoteric practices. Because the idea is that they were studying something called conditioned suppression, and Persinger in specific, which I'll link an article down below where he discusses it, where it talks about how, like, right before a person dies, they experience a flight of like a rush of activity through their body and their brain. And it was theorized by the scientists that not only did the body know ahead of time, like a form of precognition, that it was about to die, but they wanted to see in the laboratory setting if they could get the neural correlate, the physical, biophysical correlate for it, because obviously that's of use to them. Because if a person knows they're going to die and has knowledge of it beforehand, well, then there's obvious evidence of potential precognition and potential retrocausality to study in that. So that's what was also being studied in the induction of near-death experiences, because they used the Togoloshe ritual to induce a state of terror so great that I knew that my heart was going to stop. And they also, in conjunction with that, forcibly stopped it using external means, such as, I'm guessing in this case it was psychopharmacology, because I was drugged, and likely the telemetrics and psychotronics, which were all the electronics in the room, because there were, like I said, varying electronic schematics in the rooms that I was in. Some of them had a lot of electronics, and I'll get to that. There were some other tests that were done later, or like, I don't know how much later, because like I said, it's like a big black inky period. So there's like all this stuff, the heart attack stuff, the Togoloshe, the evil voodoo, and then there's other stuff I'll get to later that's more tied to non-human intelligences and skunk works and exotic matter. And that's a separate thing, but when chronologically it occurred in the span from 94 to 98, I'm not exactly certain, and I think it was a repeated thing, but I'll get to that because there's elements of time that relate to that, and that's going to be in a separate video. So to back up, we're talking about specifically the induction of egregores and and cardiac arrest in combination to study the pre-death spike of precognition. And so once the heart is fully stopped, they could still take neural data, and they still had the computer hooked up to my persons, and they were able to, through the ritual and the computer acting as a form of an egregore, use this out-of-body state to study what happens to the mind when the heart's forcibly shut off for a period and then resuscitated. Because then I remember them using the defibrillators and being really scared of those, and there were like medical personnel from sort of military fatigues, and I'm in this strange room and I don't know how I got there, and I'm terrified, and it's a mess. And what I understand is that in that instance, during the out-of-body experience, they were collecting neural data, and though my heart had flatlined, my consciousness persisted. And this is science that had also been echoed in natural near-death experience studies, that essentially scientists had been noticing that patients were showing no signs of physical life, and then they would come back to life after a cardiac arrest, and they would tell the doctor, oh, I was watching you from above the room. And the doctors theorized, like, what the heck's going on? We need to study this. Ultimately, what it turns out is that what they were confirming and confirmed is that when the heart stopped and the mind persists, and they had the telemetrics and the fine-tuned, like that's what the sensor like headsets were used sometimes too, to like capture, you know, really fine-tuned data and galvanic skin responses after the heart stopped. See, like, is there anything going on? And the answer is yes. The answer is the Meon that was being studied and was attempting to be pierced was real, and the Meon corresponds to Tesla's zero-point energy field and also to the Akashic field. It's this area where you can take information directly from a more subtle non-linear layer of the universe, and it requires physically distending one's consciousness from one's physical form to access, which was confirmed to be doable and possible in these programs. And so that's what I was put through, and that's where the non-human intelligences come in, because on the other side of that non-local space, it's not empty. But that's a good place to end this video, and I just wanted to get into a little bit of the deeper layer of how ritual abuse is weaponized and turned into neurology studies to generate data sets for dark neurology that are then further weaponized into machines that can induce effects onto people with a range of different effects that can be very, very harmful to psychologically manipulative and on. And so, again, Satanic Panic is a cover story. Thank you. Goodbye.